So hello everybody, good morning and a very warm welcome back to the third day of this year's European Spectrum Management Conference. We've had two fascinating days so far and it's hard to believe that we're on the last day already, but here we are and we're looking forward to what I'm sure are going to be some more really interesting discussions on some of the top issues and topics relating to obviously spectrum in the region. So really looking forward to what I'm sure are going to be some more interesting discussions today. Just before we start with the first session, I wanted to quickly, first of all, say a big thank you again to all of our sponsor and partner organizations. Again, you can see the logos for all of those on the screen next to me here. Really do appreciate all of their support and everything they do to make the event possible. So thank you to all of you. Also want to just quickly run through the schedule for today. So we have a number of sessions again taking place today. We're going to be starting very shortly with our first session, which is going to be looking at WRC-23 and beyond. So looking at WRC-23, looking at some of the key issues there, but also then taking the discussion a little bit further and looking at spectrum for the next generation of connectivity, maybe building up to 2030. So that's going to be our opening session today. We then have our next round of showcase sessions. And you can see on the screen here the 4 showcase sessions that we have running today. So I'll be talking more about those in a bit, but those are going to be coming up immediately following our opening session today. Before we have a short break, and then we have what we're calling our Spectrum Shorts. So we have 3 sessions, which are going to be a little bit shorter than the normal ones that we have, looking at some of the more topical issues in a kind of an interactive format, in more of a kind of a roundtable or fireside chat format, I suppose. So the 3 issues we're going to be looking at there are EMF, issue of drones and connectivity for drones, and then fixed wireless access. So we've got those 3 sessions coming up. And all of those are actually being recorded as part of our podcast series across the spectrum. So we'll be releasing all of those sessions as mini podcasts after the event as well. And then finally, we are finishing as ever with our closing ceremony. It's a Wrap, which is hosted again by BNE this year. So we're going to be hearing from some of our speakers on what their key conclusions, key takeaways are from the event. And we've also got the Sweet Beats back with us. So those of you who attended our 5G conference last year, at the start of this year, may remember we had a band, the Sweet Beats, play us out, and we've got them back again this year. So we're going to have some live music to finish us off. And as it's a Friday afternoon, what better way to finish the week than some live music there as well. So lots going on yet again, so we better get started. One thing just before we do, just to mention, in this opening session, we do have an audience poll running. So we do ask for you to please check out the poll using your screen, the right-hand side of your screen, and give us your thoughts on, we're asking what's the most prominent issue, or what you think is going to be the most prominent issue ahead of WRC-23. So please do use that poll, vote on that, and give us your thoughts there, and then we'll be bringing that into the discussion during this first session. So without further ado then, I would like to now welcome to the stage somebody who needs very little introduction, Mario Manovitz from ITU. Mario, welcome. It's great to have you with us once again for this session, and yeah, really looking forward to it. So I will, without further ado, pass over to yourself. Thanks, Mario.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your kind invitation. And good morning to all the European audience, as well as good afternoon or good evening to the audiences from other parts of the world that are joining us today. So as Dan mentioned, I will be happy to introduce this session, talking about our vision for systems beyond IMT 2020. So looking at WRC-23 and beyond, as Dan said. So if we go to the first slide, Dan. So we have noticed during these COVID times, more than ever, that having access to broadband connectivity is a must. It has even been compared to an essential good, such as electricity. And the radio communication sector of the ITU plays a key role in ensuring all people have access to broadband connectivity by developing technology standards and harmonizing spectrum. We have a rich history in the development of radio interface standards for mobile communication that supports the continuous evolution of mobile technologies. So in the next slide, we can see here that for the last 7 years, the ITUR, which we call for the radio communication sector for short, has gone through the process of developing standards for 5G. And in February this year, we published the new recommendation, ITUR M2150, with the detailed specifications of the radio interfaces for IMT 2020, which is called commercially 5G. One of the key features of this IMT process is its ability to ensure that various radio interface technology candidates are handled in a neutral way. Next slide. The current version of the recommendation contains 3 radio interface technologies. 2 additional radio interface proposals have been granted an exceptional review within the IMT 2020 process extension, and future revisions of the recommendation will accommodate future improvements to the standards, as well as the possibility of introducing new IMT 2020 radio interfaces. Next slide. Here you can see all the spectrum that has been identified for IMT in each region. And in green are the bands added in WRC-19 and frequencies where names of countries were added to existing footnotes. In short, the amount of spectrum identified jumped from around 1.9 gigahertz to over 17 gigahertz of spectrum after WRC-19. Next slide. In addition to the bands already identified for IMT, WRC-23 will also consider frequency bands for mobile broadband. Agenda item 1.2 will address the identification of several midbands for IMT, many of which are currently allocated on a primary basis to mobile, fixed, and fixed satellite services. Regarding agenda item 1.3, it will consider a primary allocation of the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz band to mobile services in Region 1. Agenda item 1.5 will review the spectrum use and spectrum needs of existing services in the frequency band UHF in Region 1, part of which is currently used by broadcasting services. Although some of the agenda items refer only to Region 1, it is clear that the decision taken by 121 countries will impact all 193 countries of the world. I am happy to share with you that in the last working party of Study Group 5, Working Party 5D meeting, they have agreed upon the IMT parameters for all WRC-23 studies, which is a great step forward. You are well aware of the importance of ITUR studies in the WRC process, and I invite you all to take part in this process if you are not already doing so. Next. Following the completion of the standardization process and the definition of globally harmonized bands for IMT, several countries have been deploying commercial 5G networks, mostly leveraging existing 4G core network infrastructure. The speed of the rollouts throughout the world will depend on several factors that go beyond standards and spectrum and include the viability of the network and the foreseen return of investment. Next. So let's see what comes after. I mean, IMT, as we call it, towards 2030. We don't have a name yet, so we call it IMT Beyond IMT 2020. Next slide. It is still early to talk about 6G systems, but in the ITUR, we are currently anticipating new use cases for IMT and identifying any gaps, as well as new technical enablers necessary in the 2030 timeframe. We are very much in the beginning of the process of developing a standard, and the 4 big blocks on this process, as you can see in the slide, include the development of a vision, what is our objective with the technology, the minimum requirements for the technology, and how to evaluate these requirements, the submission of proposals, and evaluation of several radio interface technology candidates before building consensus and finally approving a specification. So this is the same process that we followed for the IMT 2020, and then we are starting it now for the IMT 2030. So it's not just a matter of saying, okay, we need a new generation every roughly 10 years. What we need to define first is what is the objective of having a new generation. And there will surely be objectives, but we have to define them and then see what requirements and which technologies could fulfill those objectives. Next slide. In these very early stages, we will start working on a new report on future technology trends towards 2030 and beyond, and on a recommendation with a vision for the technology. As I said, this is the first step that we need to follow. Next. Among the technology trends and enablers that we are looking at this moment, we go from technologies for native artificial intelligence-based communication to enhanced RAN privacy, to integrated sensing and communication, to enhance energy efficiency and low power consumption, and for terahertz communication, just to name a few. There will be others that will come up, but those are the ones that we are initially looking at. Next slide. It's important to mention that beyond the technological trends and all the new services and applications, the motivation behind the development of new standards should include issues such as affordability and sustainability, connecting the unconnected and enhancing trust. These are issues that are at the top of the agenda of all regulators, and then we shouldn't forget about them when thinking about a new standard. Next. I've already mentioned this many times, but I never get tired of it. In the ITU, we believe in a shared journey so that all people can benefit from global standards. And what we say by shared journey is that everybody contributes to it with its ideas, with its initiatives, with its concerns, with its priorities, so that we can respond to all concerns of all parties. And if in the next slide, we can see that, as you know very well, our membership is constituted not only about member states, but also about industry and international organizations. That is the bulk, if you want, in numbers. And now lately, also academic members that have joined our work. So this joint work enriches what we do and makes sure that we have all the points of view taken in consideration. So I invite, as I do usually, all organizations, companies, representatives from industries, verticals, to contribute to the work of the ITUR so that you make sure that your concerns, your ideas, your initiatives, your priorities are taken into account. So the last slide is just to thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Mario. Thank you very much for that. I think we're going to move straight on now to Sasha, I guess. So if I could maybe leave it back to you to introduce Sasha for his presentation there.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So we'll do that. So following my introduction, we will have a presentation from Alexander Collod, who is the chairman of the European Working Group for the preparation of the WRC-23, which is called CPEG 23. So he will present an update on the preparation for WRC-23 by the CEPT, the European group of countries. And then afterwards, we'll have a panel of industry representatives to discuss the same issue from the industrial point of view. So Sasha, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mario. Thank you also for introducing me very well. And before I start with my talk, I would like to thank the Forum Global for inviting me here as a speaker to this session. And I'm very delighted indeed to be here as the chairman of Conference Preparatory Group of CPT and to present the progress achieved within CPT in preparing 2023 conference. Next slide, please. As a way of introduction, I would like to make an analogy between the WRC process and a train moving from one railway station to another. A train has a limited capacity, just like the radio spectrum. When the train stops at a station, some passengers get off while others get in. In general, the number of passengers getting off the train and the number of the passengers coming in the train is equal. And similar process happens at a World Radio Conference. Some services and applications get access to the spectrum, some others may need to leave it. However, contrary to the train passengers, there are more services and their applications that seek to access the spectrum than those that are willing to leave it. In addition, some passengers travel in the first class, like some services use the frequencies on a primary basis with no or few constraints. Some other services access the spectrum with some restrictions, including being designated as secondary services, like passengers traveling in the second class with less room. So the art and the beauty of the conference, or regulators and policymakers taking part therein, is to provide access to the spectrum for new services and applications, but such that existing users can continue to access this natural resource with, as far as possible, no additional restrictions. And the WRC train is now moving to 2023 station, and we will see which passengers will be getting on board, and which of them will travel in the first class and which in the second. Next slide, please. The whole WRC cycle is divided into two periods. The first starts right after the first session of the conference preparatory meeting and lasts until formally the beginning of the conference. During this period, ITUR conducts studies and reflects their outcome and conclusions in the so-called conference preparatory meeting report. And this period is called nominally consensus-seeking studies, as we are agreeing on the assumptions for the studies and on their results. At the conference, we do not conduct any more the studies. We come to the conference with concrete views and proposals how to resolve the agenda of the conference. And during the 4 weeks of the conference, we negotiate our proposals with others. Therefore, we call this process consensus-seeking negotiations. CPT is one of the 6 regional organizations and is actively involved in ITUR studies towards the conference. As many of you are aware, I believe, our regional preparation of the conference, as was also now pointed out by Mario, is undertaken within the conference preparatory group, which I have honor to chair. Next slide, please. CPEG is composed of 5 project teams, each with a well-defined scope and area of responsibility. In particular, we have a project team dealing with scientific and general issues, a project team dealing with space issues, another one dealing with aeronautical, maritime, and radiolocation issues that we group under the term transport. We also have a project team dealing with the IMT matters, and finally, we have separated UHF discussions into a dedicated project team. Such organization allows us to follow closely and to contribute to the ITUR studies in the responsible working parties and the task group. As far as possible, a coordinator or a team of coordinators are nominated for each agenda item. These people lead the discussions on the agenda item within corresponding project teams. They are also our spokesperson in ITUR meetings and at the conference itself. Next slide, please. CPEG is a place where regulators and policymakers from 48 CPT countries, as well as numerous observers, we all meet there to discuss and agree on European positions on the conference agenda. At the end of the consensus-seeking studies or period, we develop and approve European Common Proposals, ECPs, for the work of the conference. And in order for a proposal to become an ECP, Common Proposal from Europe, it should be supported by at least 10 CPT members and should not be opposed by more than 6 members. Within CPEG, we are also developing so-called CPT briefs that, together with the preliminary CPT position, contain a background information and justification for this position. During the study cycle, we are also defining positions and develop contributions to different ITUR meetings dealing with the conference preparations. And finally, CPEG is maintaining a dialogue with other regional organizations. It is indeed an important part of our work. The cooperation between regional organizations is one of the key factors for the successful conference. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the agenda of the 2023 conference. It contains 19 different items and 4 topics that, generally speaking, fall into 4 categories of issues: mobile, space, transport, and scientific issues. I would like to note here that this agenda has been compiled to a large extent following the proposal from CPT to 2019 conference. It means that we are equally interested within CPT in all agenda items, and we want that the conference resolve all of them. I may nevertheless highlight 2 agenda items that, with no doubt, will be highly contentious and time-consuming at the next conference. I mean here the review of the UHF band and possible IMT identification in the mid-bands. I would like also to add that for nearly all agenda items and topics, CPT started to build up its preliminary CPT position. Because of the time, I will concentrate on the next slides on presenting you the current CPT position on the mobile agenda of the conference, and then I will also move shortly to the satellite issues as well as to the agenda of 2027 conference. A number of so now moving to the mobile agenda items, as you see now on the screen, a number of frequency bands are considered by this category of agenda items. Starting with, as I mentioned previously, a high-profile UHF band, I should probably not say a lot, as there was a very exciting session on this yesterday. I will just confirm that CPT regulators are fully aware that a lot is at stake under this agenda item, both for the broadcasting and for the mobile community. Therefore, we are seeking for a long-term balance between satisfying various national requirements and ensuring effective cross-border coordination between the broadcasting service and various mobile service applications. Now moving to the band 3.3, 3.4 GHz. This frequency band is extensively used by different types of radars, terrestrial, maritime, aeronautical, and we don't foresee any change in usage on a long-term basis. And because of the incompatibility between radio location and the mobile IMT on co-channel, and thus the need for large co-channel separation distances, this band is not supported for IMT by CPT. As for the frequency band 3.6, 3.8 GHz, in CPT, as you may be aware, this frequency range is already designated for broadband mobile. Therefore, we are likely to support an upgrade of the mobile service to the primary status in Region 1. However, our primary condition would be that the existing CPT regulatory framework for mobile broadband in this band should be continued with no impact. Another band is 4.8, 4.99 GHz, which you might recall was extensively debated at the 2019 conference in Sharm el-Sheikh because of IMT identification in this band for some countries. The 2019 conference made a decision on the need for studies to address the protection of aeronautical mobile and maritime mobile service stations, which are located in international waters and airspace. In this respect, CPT is of the view that proper PFD limit is to be used for such protection. Next slide, please. Continue with the list of bands under the mobile agenda. A few words about 6-7 GHz bands, which are foreseen either for regional, Region 1, or global IMT identification. Incumbents in this band are the fixed service and the fixed satellite service. And the results of the sharing and compatibility studies between IMT and these incumbents will be certainly decisive as far as the CPT position for this band is concerned. So far, we don't have any firm position on this. Another band where we have already preliminary view is the 10 GHz band. The consideration for IMT is for Region 2 only. However, this band is used by active and passive ESSS, Earth Exploration Satellite systems, and these systems have global coverage. and as such might be impacted if this band is identified for IMT. Therefore, for CPT, it is important that no additional regulatory or technical constraints to active and passive ESSS stations are imposed should this band be identified for IMT. And the last topic that falls into the mobile agenda items is related to the studies of the usage of IMT technologies in the frequency bands allocated to the fixed service. We are quite pragmatic in CPT on this topic and defined our position for some time already. In particular, we are of the view that no regulatory action is required. There is no revision to the radio regulations in order to resolve this issue. We strongly believe that this could and should be also addressed through the revisions of existing ITO recommendations and reports. And this is all I could say with respect to the mobile agenda, and would like now to move on to the satellite agenda of the next conference. Yes, thank you. Well, first, I would like to observe that satellite issues have always taken an important part in the conference discussions. The next conference is not an exception. Among around 25 different items and topics, more than 1/3 are either implicitly or explicitly related to satellites. First, we have here the items and topics that are dealing with the protection of existing satellite allocations from, let's call them newcomers. I mentioned previously that the satellite reception might be compromised in some bands if the mobile service is allocated in these bands, and more specifically, if IMT system technologies are used in these bands. Some other satellite items are seeking to strengthen the current usage of satellite allocations. Good examples here are so-called Earth Station in motions in Ku and Ka bands, which are communicating respectively with geostationary and non-geostationary satellites. CPT supports such operation, but under the condition, of course, that to ensure the protection of existing services in band and in adjacent bands. Then we have agenda items where additional spectrum for space communication is sought. For example, as far as new spectrum for inter-satellite links in Ku and Ka bands, we would like to apply here so-called the cone of coverage concept. Under this concept, inter-satellite operations are allowed only between satellites that are within the cone of coverage of GSO and non-GSO space stations. Another example is related to the studies for region 2 to allocate spectrum around 17 gigahertz to FSS. Given that frequency band is already allocated to FSS in region 1, CPT would support a similar allocation in region 2, which would facilitate the use of spectrum available to satellite networks and systems. Certainly, studies should show that the new allocation is feasible. And finally, we have agenda items and topics that are aiming to improve and, if necessary, remedy the satellite regulatory procedures. We have here a standard agenda item 7, that is a mini conference itself in view of the number of topics and issues dealt with under this agenda item. Next slide, please. Well, I thought to move quickly, slightly beyond 2023 and to devote few seconds, just few seconds, to the preliminary agenda of 2027 conference. In fact, one has already potentially 13 items on the agenda of 2023 conference. 6 of them were proposed by CPT to 2023, but at the end were postponed until 2027. Some of these 13 items may become hot. For example, consideration of possible removal of the limitation regarding aeronautical mobile in the IMT band 694-960 megahertz in order to use IMT user terminals for non-safety applications. To be clear, we speak here about IMT terminals which are flying, that is on drones. So another potential hot issue could be the mobile service in 1300 megahertz band. CPT will certainly receive further proposals for the agenda of the 2027 conference. As we have some industry stakeholders on this panel, they may say more in this regard. On my side, I don't have much to add as far as the agenda of the 2027 conference is concerned. And I would like to move to the last slide, please. And to provide my final remarks, I would like just to reiterate that the agenda of the next conference has many issues that are important, or better to say, crucial for many industries. It means that the way the conference resolves these issues will affect many people in many countries. Therefore, the decisions that we are going to take in 2023 should be balanced and take account of different needs, requirements, and possible consequences. This can only be achieved if the conducted studies are indeed profound, thorough, and of good quality. And anyway, I am certain that the regulators and policymakers are doing their best during this ongoing consensus-seeking studies period, and we'll do our best during the consensus-seeking negotiations at the conference to get it right for all concerned stakeholders. With this, I'll end my presentation and would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. A very good and thorough presentation. I liked your analogy with the train and the passengers in first and second class. I think it's most descriptive and very appropriate to a Swiss delegate. So let me ask you a question before we move on. You mentioned some of the topics that you say that are going to be difficult at the conference, and I agree with you. Topics such as the UHF band and the mid bands for IMT. But maybe there are other topics that you find easy to get a consensus before the conference, so that we can put them aside and said, well, these are in the pocket. There is a global consensus that we could reach before the conference in a rather, let's say, general and simple manner. Do you see such topics?
Well, as the 2013-19 conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, we spent considerable amount of time to agree on the agenda for 2023 conference. One may interpret this as all items and topics have a certain degree of complexity that require 3,000 or so delegates to discuss in 2023. However, you're right, Mario, that for some questions, one can expect to come to consensus quicker than for some other questions. In this respect, I hope that the conference could come up with an agreement or at least, if not all, but at least on some of the scientific agenda items. The immediate example coming to my mind is agenda item 1.13, dealing with the possible upgrade of the allocation of the 14A to 1535 GHz band for the Space Research Service. And I based my conclusion on the current preliminary positions of different regional organizations, what I was aware of, where all are supporting such upgrade. So you may find analogy 113 2019, 2023. So let's hope that 113 2023 will be easier to resolve than 113 in 2019.
Thank you. I'm sure of that. 113 in 2019 was the most difficult one in the conference. So thank you very much for your insights, Alexander. We thank you for your participation as well. So let's move on. As I said before, we have now a panel of industry representatives that are going to talk to us also about the key issues for WRC-23, such as the UHF, the C-band, the 6 GHz band, and others that would likely be the hottest ones for this conference. But also as we move beyond WRC-23, which will likely be, in their views, the new key spectrum issues in Europe as well as elsewhere. And for that, we have tried to have a balanced panel, as we usually do. So we have Glyn Carter, who is the Senior Spectrum Advisor at GSMA. Welcome, Glyn. We have also Adrian Herbera, who is the co-chair of ITU Working Group for ESOA. Welcome, Adrian. We have Arturo Baglioni, who is the Terrestrial Frequency Manager at RAI Italia.
Good morning.
Good morning, representing the broadcasters. And we have Ayman Mohedlin, who is the senior specialist in spectrum regulation from Nokia, who will be talking to us about the next generation connectivity from an operator's viewpoint. So welcome you all to the panel. And as we usually do, we'll start with a brief presentation from each one of you to introduce your views on the topics that I have mentioned. So let's go in the order I just mentioned. So let's start with Glyn from GSMA. Glyn, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mario. So hello and good day to everyone. I'm going to talk briefly about the importance of WRC-23 for 5G and the mobile industry, and also briefly about what might come beyond that. Next slide, please. Mobile makes a massive contribution to the European and global economies, and brings substantial benefits for users of the services. And we expect that this will continue and extend and be enhanced with 5G developments, and that mobile data usage will continue to grow. Next slide, please. If we look at the bands that are being studied for IMT under different WRC-23 agenda items, then we see that most of these bands are being considered for Region 1, including Europe, of course. Next slide, please. However, not all of these bands that are being studied will in practice be usable in Europe. In the low band, agenda item 1.5 is studying UHF spectrum between 470 and 960 megahertz. And that is obviously an important agenda item in Europe. In mid-band, however, if we look at the bands that are being studied in Region 1, then we see that two of these bands are, I think it's true to say, unlikely to be usable in most countries in Europe. These are the 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz band and the 4.8 to 4.99 gigahertz band, which were mentioned briefly by Sasha earlier. Then we have the band 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz, but this is, as you'll be aware, already being used for 5G in Europe. So that leaves only the upper 6 gigahertz band, which is potential spectrum for future enhancement of 5G. Next slide, please. Looking at some of these bands in a bit more detail, the band 470 to 694 megahertz has the potential to provide increased capacity and improved performance for rural areas and other hard to reach places. And this can help to lower the digital divide. And we believe that a primary mobile allocation in 470 to 694 megahertz can provide flexibility for different regions and countries within Region 1 to be able to choose the optimum way to use that spectrum according to their situations and their needs. Considering 3.4 to 3.8 gigahertz, in particular, the upper half of that band, this spectrum is already the primary spectrum, the primary band being used for initial 5G deployments, including in Europe. However, this is being used currently under only a secondary allocation in the radio regulations, and hence we believe that a primary mobile allocation is required in Region 1 in 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz in order to bring the radio regulations up to date with what is actually happening and to provide enhanced harmonization, improved access to that spectrum, and reduced costs for users. Looking at the upper 6 gigahertz band between 6425 and 7125 megahertz. This can provide citywide capacity for future 5G expansion, which will be required in the future. This will be important for the future of 5G and in order to provide affordable mobile broadband and other services into the future. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to look briefly at what comes beyond WRC-23. In my role at GSMA, my current focus is very much on WRC-23. However, what comes beyond that is also going to be important, and this is particularly so because the WRCs only happen every 4 years, and after a decision is taken at WRC, it can take many years for that decision actually to be implemented and for that spectrum to be used in practice. It's clear that additional mid-band spectrum will be required for 5G expansion in the future, but I ask the question, where is this spectrum going to come from? And that is not an easy question to answer, and you will have heard my remarks about that earlier on the previous slide. The radio regulations, I believe, should be an enabler for future technology developments, and they should be running ahead of those developments, not catching up with them. As an example of this, a good example is the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz band, which is already a primary 5G band in Europe and many parts of the world, but in region 1 in particular, the radio regulations do not currently adequately reflect that. So what comes beyond WRC-23, as you will see, will partly depend on what happens at WRC-23, and we hope that the decisions taken at WRC-23 will provide the framework for the future expansion of 5G and other mobile services. So that I will say thank you very much for listening. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Very nice overview of the views of the mobile industry. Let's take a look at the views of the satellite industry now with Adrian, that is representing ESOA. Adrian, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you, Mario, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this very interesting panel. I would like to give a quick overview of the evolution of satellite communications and its relation with the World Radio Conference 23 and beyond. Next slide, please. So, mobility services. Today, there is an important demand for broadband satellite connection in flights, trains, ships, cruises, and this is a reality today. But tomorrow we will have also connected cars by satellite and drones that will access to the satellite connections once or whenever they don't have access to terrestrial services, and will allow them to download software or be controlled remotely. In this context, the World Radio Conference has several agenda items that deal with mobility. We have, for example, 115 that proposes the introduction of eSIMs in Appendix 30B KU plan bands, while at the same time protecting the essence and the spirit of the plan band. We have 116 that proposes the use of eSIMs connected with NGSOs in K-band, which is a natural evolution from the previous conference with this allocation was made to GSOs. We have also 1.7, which is proposing a new allocation for aeronautical mobile satellite services and in safe communications in UHF bands that will enhance the air traffic management. And also we have 1.8 that is the consolidation of unmanned aircraft using unplanned FSS bands. This comes from 2 conferences ago, and this will be the consolidation of this kind of communications. Next slide, please. So mega constellations, this is trending topic today. Who has not heard about the 2,000 satellites that SpaceX has already launched, the hundreds of satellites that OneWeb is already launching, or the new constellation that that Europe is planning and developing? So in this context, again, in the World Radio Conference, we have several agenda items discussing about NGSO constellations. We have the post milestones. We are discussing which milestones we will have to meet in order to preserve those notified NGSO filings in order to keep their parameters. Also the orbital tolerances that we can assume to consider that those NGSO are working within the parameters notified in their filings. We have also 116 that I have already mentioned it before, and 117 that proposes satellite-to-satellite links in traditional FSS bands. But this doesn't finish here. It goes beyond World Radio Conference 23. And very, very important is how these NGSOs will coordinate and will assess their interference. While for the GSO case of interference and coordination, we have a lot of experience, and there are a lot of recommendations and reports that deal about this. For NGSO coordinations, there are not many recommendations, and there are current proposals at the ITU to develop such recommendations. And same happen with the methodology to calculate aggregate interference from NGSO into GSO. There are current limits in the ITU that establish the maximum interference that GSO can support from aggregate interference from NGSO, but there is not a methodology that explains how to calculate this aggregate interference, and this will be done now and in the future, and I'm sure that we'll continue the discussions beyond World Radio Conference 23. Next slide, please. 5G, the network of networks. I would like to emphasize here the key role of the satellite that is going to play in the 5G, and I would like to highlight that without the satellite, we cannot forget about having a real network of networks and a complete network of networks. And in that context, I would like to mention the importance of preserving the satellite bands. We have different agenda items in World Radio Conference 23, for example, agenda item 1.2 and 1.3, that they study the possible identification of IMT in C-band or a new allocation of mobile service in C-band. And I would like to emphasize how important is the C-band for satellite communication, for providing very critical services that require of high availability, that due to the characteristics of this band and the resilient terrain can only be provided in this band. We cannot provide those services in upper band like in KU or in Ku band. And also another example of preserve the satellite bands is the discussions that are already happening with respect to Article 21.5 to ensure the protection of satellite receivers from terrestrial service interference. It's very important to continue having the coexistence between those services. Next slide, please. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much, and I will be more than happy to answer any question that the audience may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. Very nice presentation. We'll leave the questions for after all panelists have presented, if you don't mind. So, as you know, the third traditional industry after the presentations we heard from the mobile and the satellite communities is the broadcasting one, which had a quiet conference in 2019, but will be much more agitated in 2023. I guess you agree with me, Arturo.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so please go ahead and present to us what are the aspects of the conference that are of concern to broadcasters.
Okay, thank you, Mario, and good morning again, everyone. I'm Arturo Baglioni, responsible for RISE frequency management, and I'm so glad for being invited to participate to this conference. Well, it's not easy to make hypotheses on the topics that may be of interest of WRC following the WRC-23. Nevertheless, starting from the Italian reality, I would like to share with you very simple concepts that I have summarized in a few slides that might trace a path that can allow us to focus attention on topics of potential interest for broadcasting also beyond the WRC-23. We can go to the first slide, please. Okay. Rai Radio Televisione Italiana is the Italian public broadcasting company, and it's one of the largest media companies in Europe that operates in radio television, film production, internet sectors, and Rai started its first TV terrestrial transmission in 1954. Rai is also an ITU sector member, and its experts have been contributing to the development of technical studies within the ITU framework regarding TV and audio broadcasting. And as each European public service media broadcaster, Rai has got a mission set by law, which consists in producing and delivering contents and services to inform, educate, and entertain all citizens wherever they are. To fulfill this universal service obligation, Rai, as many public service media broadcasters, has been broadcasting the entire editorial offer for a long time through 3 different platforms: by satellite, through the free-to-air TVSAT platform, by digital terrestrial television, through which is also delivered the regional information, on internet protocol with the Rai Play platform. Each of these 3 platforms potentially might reach the entire national population. But the crucial question is, what platform are people using today to watch television? And it is important to answer this question with official data. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at the official Italian data. In Italy, the digital terrestrial television is still the platform with the greatest penetration among users, considering that more than 55 million Italians, around 91% of national population, accesses TV through DTT platform. Data collected at the beginning of 2021 has not shown any particular change compared to the last 10 years. What are the reasons for this success over 10 years after the analog switch off? Well, DTT means a near universal coverage, free-to-air contents of general interest, conveyed directly to citizen trustable information. DTT is a pillar of democracy and cultural models, and is the only way for public service media broadcasters to reach a citizen without intermediary. I can also add other aspects of DTT. It is safe against cyber attacks, and DTT systems are the most respectable of users' privacy, and it is essential in the event of a natural disaster or periods of emergency, such as those we are experiencing due to the pandemic. DTT offers a guarantee of quality of services independently of the number of people who use it. Next slide, please. Well, as for the UHF band issue, it is well known that there was a strong reduction in the UHF band of the spectrum available for broadcasting purposes. In WRC-07, 72 megahertz of UHF band were allocated to mobile service in a co-primary allocation status with broadcasting. Then, starting from 2013 in Italy, these frequencies have been used for LTE applications. In WRC-12, again, 96 megahertz more of UHF band were allocated to mobile and co-primary allocation. Starting from 1st July 2022 in Italy, this frequency will be used for 5G application. The conclusion is immediate. The last WRCs have confirmed that co-primary allocation to broadcasting and mobile services has always resulted in broadcasters' release of the band. I'd say that this is the flexibility that has been experienced up to now in the UHF band. So I don't think that the flexibility approach is applicable on the UHF band. Flexibility has meant switch off broadcasting. And I think that in UHF band, the flexibility can only be applicable under the provisions of the Geneva 06 framework. Differently, flexibility might consist in a secondary service allocation to mobile. Anyway, at this stage, the DTT platform maintains 28 UHF channels to share with radioelectrically neighboring countries under the so-called equitable access approach. And this involves almost all the Italian regions. The Italian frequency plan defined 14 DVB-T2 networks available over the entire national territory. The SOUs of these multiplex are assigned at least until 2032. In Italy, the refarming process is still to be started, and it takes place from September 2021 to June 2022, according to the national roadmap. All Italian broadcasters, and in particular RAI as public service media broadcaster, are therefore continuing to invest heavily in the DTT platform, both in networks plant restructuring in order to allow the release of frequencies within the 700 MHz band which are currently used, and for the start of DVB-T2 broadcast. As a consequence, DTT platform will stay the main platform to deliver audio-video contents towards national population. This will take place also by widening the editorial offer and improving the technical quality of our services by increasing HD contents with possible insertion of UHD programs, and thus maintaining the DTT platform at the highest level allowed by current technologies. I want to point out that in this context, taking as an example my company, we have that today RAI can use 5 DVB-T multiplexes for a total amount of 100 megabit per second of transmission capacity. With the beginning of the refarming process, there will be a transition period still in DVB-T technology, with a reduction to no more than 3 multiplexes and a reduction of transmission capacity to around 60 megabit per second. At the end of the refarming process, and only after the complete transition to DVB-T2 technology from June 2022, RAI can have available 100 megabit per second as today. So, note that RAI has been investing a total of 1 billion euros in the next years to have available the same transmission capacity as today. Considering that this process must be afforded by all European broadcasters, it's not possible to take into consideration any change in the sub-700 MHz band. Also on this basis, the Italian administration indicated that the required amount of spectrum for DTT in the future is going to be 224 MHz. And now the question is, what is the required amount of spectrum for DTT in the future for the other administrations? Next slide, please. Well, this is very clear. The analysis shows this is within the framework of the WRC-23 agenda item 1.5, ITU working party 6A sent a questionnaire to all administration of member states of ITU on the spectrum use and spectrum needs. The analysis shows that 90% of administration in ITU Region 1 indicated a requirement for at least 224 MHz of spectrum for DTT in the future. And, well, we can arrive to the last slide. The next one, yes, thank you. The first point is on what WRC shouldn't not deliver. At the European level, we saw the first day of the conference that in the draft RSPG opinion on the radio spectrum policy program, it was highlighted that there is more than 12 gigahertz of harmonized spectrum available for wireless services and no need to define any quantitative target in radio spectrum policy program to respond to European policies. On the other side, broadcasters need spectrum for DTT, PMC, and innovating. And after being squeezed until 694 MHz, they will need to look for other frequencies ranges in the future. In my opinion, after the release of 700 MHz band, there might be a need in delivering the following issues towards WRC-27. Could be identified a dedicated harmonized band for PMC that above 694 MHz that can meet the expected increase in demand for content production. Could be defined a more efficient use of mobile bands. it is crucial that the spectrum already allocated for wireless services is effectively used in each member state. In the last table, I'm trying to compare the services available in the UHF band in terms of technologies that they use and the years in which they have implemented by now. Particularly by June 2022, in the 500, 600 megahertz band, we will have 2 technology steps in only 10 years. Telecom operators should optimize their use of spectrum, as it seems to be the case of 900 megahertz band. The WRC-23 so could be a good opportunity for a process oriented to optimize the 862 until 960 megahertz band, reviewing the planning of the band above 862 megahertz by reducing the number of frequencies arrangements and duplex gaps, replanning the frequency allocation for secondary services, and with these occasions, switch off the older technologies to evolve toward the new ones, 5G or 6G, for a more efficient use and saving energy for the environment. Well, there is an intention from RAI in asking the Italian administration to share this objective in the relevant CPT working groups involved in the WRC preparation. I think it's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Arturo. Well, I think you have clearly confirmed that UHF will be one of the hot topics at the conference. So thank you for your detailed presentation. And the last presentation we have from our panelists today is from Ayman, who will give us an overview of the forward-thinking view of an equipment manufacturer such as Nokia. So please, Ayman, you have the floor.
Thank you, Director Mario, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the vision and what is going to come forward. My name is Ima Mohedin, and I do work for Nokia, as been mentioned by Mr. Mario, the Director Piro. I'm going to take you a bit of a future and what is going to look at. We are all now currently seeing that the focus of wireless research is increasingly shifting towards new generation systems. And as is being mentioned at the beginning by the distinguished director, is that there is a need to establish, and it's essential to establish a vision and objective for the future generation systems that we are expecting to see in the 2030s. So next slide, please. For the next generation systems, maybe first of all, we have to start about what will look like. And the first thing we start with is the device, how devices will be looking like. We are going to see more wearable devices, implanted devices in your skin, in your as well in your clothes, and this will require a certain kind of a context awareness things. So in that direction, maybe we have to think about what kind of a trend we are going to see. So the trend is that we are going to see from the devices, because this is one of the things which we have to look at it. It should be effortless to use, control, invisible, but everywhere. Second slide, please. The second slide is we're going to see the future communication. We are currently seeing the 5G and IMT 2020. There are also some kind of like a certain kind of use cases which is being implemented. And for the future, we are going to see, for example, more artificial intelligence is going to be introduced in use cases like telepresence, and other things. We are going also to experience other context awareness and machine learning things. We are also going to see also an augmented control. For example, we are going to see more and more this remote and self-tracing. So the future system and the future generation will enable new lifestyles at the different scales. And this is only just giving you a snapshot how it's going to look like. Second slide, please. So all those use cases and technology trends will also going to come out with new requirements. The requirement which we will have, for example, for IMT 2020, that is still going to be valid, but we are going to have as the same thing that we are going to have also an evolution of these 5G services. And we are going to see that, for example, in terms when I look at the device, and we are going to have a more wearable devices, a more context aware machine learning and all of those things. This is will have a certain kind of new requirement. This new requirement, I'm just picturing out that the throughput and capacity that are going to be definitely increasing. We are going to see a more latency and reliability. For example, we are having now 1 millisecond as one of the requirements for 2020, but maybe for 2030, we are going to have in a part of nanoseconds going down. Reliability should be zero, should be 100% or maybe more than 100%, but this is also a part of the research and the objective which we are going to think about it. Scalability and flexibility, we're going to see more and more these machine-to-machine things. Positioning and accuracy from a part of sensing, we are going to see advances in sensing as well. Adaptability to response time that will require a high context aware and a high context systems and these devices. And second slide, please. Yes, this is more of the future requirement, but nevertheless, the requirement which we are having currently for the current systems, if you look at the past, present, and future, and if you see how they have been going forward, you can see as well that in 2G we have the voices. It's continue to have a voices in 3G and 4G, and it's going to continue also in the in future systems. 6G is a term which is currently used by the research people. So the fact is that each new generation system will be optimizing the new use cases. So those new use cases are going to be existing, they are going to be evolved, they are going to be developed. And then on top of it, we are going to see some kind of trends and some changes in those new use cases. And we will have new use cases plus the other one, which is going to exist. For example, this morning, Mario was mentioning that EMPP will be a must. It's not going to be an optional one. It's going to be a must. So next slide, please. So from all of those new requirement, the devices, how they are going to change, from as well what kind of new use cases is going to emerge. We have to find as well a way how to fulfill those objectives, and to fulfill the objective of the new generation system, and also keeping the old system to be existing and evolve as well. We are going to see a different part of the spectrum to realize those ones. And low bands, for example, the UHF for extended coverage is also needed for new systems. Coverage and capacity in the mid bands. High bands, the millimeter wave, which is being as well one of the fuel engine for the mobile communication. This is also going to exist, but we are also seeing in the research as well, we are going to have new bands are going to be studied. And these all of those layers of spectrum is needed for 5G as well as they are needed for the future generation system. Specifically, if we talk about the WRC-23 and the result of the WRC-23, this will be an instrumentally and will be key bands to further facilitate the evolution and what we wanted to see for our digital society in 2030. So the WRC-23 outcome is also going to be a part that which we needed. Next slide, please. So to sum it up, the vision for 2030 need to meet also the need of digitalized economy and society. We need to have a network and technology that can support better and sustainable world. We have to look at reliances and security. But on the top of all of that, when we look at it and when we see how this 23, the WRC-23 could be a part of the evolution in 2030s, we have to see that this the WRC-23 and beyond will give us also some kind of new opportunities. These new opportunities will look on a variety of a wide spectrum bands. This will be connected with the different deployment scenarios, like you have to take care of the coverage and capacity, for example. And also you have to think about it, how it will evolve in the future. So we will going to see as well different spectrum access model. This is will also going to, we are also going to think about spectrum sharing if there is a need for spectrum sharing. For example, in 2030 digital compass, you can see from the European, which they have published recently, you can see that they are also talking about model of spectrum sharing. ITUR already started the process. We have started developing a work on IMT vision. This will give a framework and overall objective for a future development for IMT 2030 and beyond. Research, for example, there is an HEXA-X project in the UAE, Horizon 2030. We are also seeing the process in ITUR. So this is all in a nutshell that we are going to see it. WRC-23 is going to give the fundamental and the key issues for the involvement for those systems, and we are going to see more beyond 2023. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ayman, for this forward-looking presentation. Let's bring all the panelists to the screen. Yes, so we have all panelists and we can start addressing questions that have come. So while we are waiting for the results of the poll, let me have a first round of questions. So I have a question for Glyn that is coming from the Czech Telecommunication Office. So Glyn, how do you see the feasibility of a possible European or regional extension in the 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz band for 5G?
Thank you, Mario, and thank you for the question. Yes, I think this is a good question, maybe a very controversial one, I feel as well. But from my point of view, I think that the spectrum above 3 to 8 gigahertz, has certainly has potential to be a very useful band for 5G expansion in the future. I think it would be good if that could be considered for that purpose. I note also that I mentioned that 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz was a band that was being used for 5G in many countries without a primary mobile allocation in Region 1. But if you look in some other parts of the world, such as some countries in Regions 2 and Regions 3, you see that some of the spectrum above 3 to 8 gigahertz is also planned to be used for that purpose, or maybe in some cases already in use. So I think, yes, I certainly think this is a part of the spectrum that it will be beneficial to consider in future, and in fact is already being considered for that purpose in some countries. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have a question also for Adrian. Adrian, as you know, the use, the efficient use of the spectrum is key. It's always been the case, and now it's more and more the case with more and more demands for the spectrum. So from the perspective of the satellite operators, how will be the WRC-23 helping to make a more efficient use of the spectrum in your view?
Thank you, Mario. If you allow me to comment the question to Glyn, please don't make me suffer. I mean, it's very important for us. No, but with respect to your question, Mario, many thanks for the question. And I would say that through very imaginative proposals, this is like the train that Shasha mentioned and the analogy. So there are proposals in this World Radio Conference that are proposing to enlarge the capacity of the trains, to have more passengers without modifying the train. And let me refer to specific examples. For example, 115 that proposes to extend the scope of Appendix 30B plan bands through the introduction of SIMs, while at the same time protecting the plan assignments. So why to limit the use of this band for traditional FSS if in addition we can use them for mobility through SIMs? And the same happens with 117, which is proposing the users of traditional FSS band, KE-on, KE-off band mainly, to implement satellite-to-satellite links, while at the same time protecting and not limiting the traditional FSS use of the band. When I mean traditional, I mean connection from the satellite to the Earth. So in that context, we would be introducing satellites-to-satellite communications without limiting the traditional links. And 119, for example, that proposes to make a new FSS down in a location in the 17.3, 17.7 GHz band, which is already allocated to BSS and will give the operators the flexibility to choose between the two services. So if both services have the same interference framework and create the same type of interference, why not to allow the operators to choose which service is more convenient to provide at each time? And thank you, Mario.
Thank you, Adrian. So Arturo, for you, I have a question from Free TV Australia. So you see this is going beyond Europe. So, well, we've heard from you that there are a diversity of views on the future of the band 470 to 694 megahertz. So in your view, what happens if, do you think that it might happen that there would not be an agreement achieved on the method to satisfy agenda item 1.5? And if this occurs, do you believe that it may be necessary to carry forward some aspects of this agenda item to WRC-27?
Well, that's a good point, and I want to start to share some concept because the crucial point is that the UHF band is the only remaining spectrum for DTT. And as I told in my short presentation, terrestrial broadcasting is an essential means of transmissions for its efficiency to deliver linear audiovisual services to very large audiences. And another point is that the 700 MHz band is still in progress or still to be started, as in Italy. And the broadcasters, therefore, are continuing to invest heavily in DTT platform, both in network plans and also for starting the DVB-T2 broadcast. And so, for example, as I told during the presentation, I has been investing a total of 1 billion euros for that process. And I think that there is no need to have a solution different from no change under the agenda item 1.5, because otherwise it would mean to switch off television. And I really was very impressed from one of your slides, Mario. I don't know if then I can share it again. And it was the one about the spectrum already identified for IMT. Dan, I don't know if you can share again on the screen, because if I put in connection that slide with an absolute huge amount of spectrum already identified for IMT, and in particular in region 1, more than, is the slide from Mario's presentation, Sorry. There was a slide with the title Spectrum Already Identified for IMT, sorry. But it was really useful to express my concept, because it's a huge amount of spectrum already identified to IMT. So I really don't can catch why there is a need to find other spectrum with a very important consequence, as it would be the switch off of digital terrestrial television. And moreover, I cannot connect this slide with what the RSPG draft opinion on the RSPP program. So what I want to say is that there is already identified a huge amount of spectrum for IMT, and I think that we can put our attention, for example, in the upper part of the UHF band. I noticed that in the part above 862, there is a coexistence of all technologies as 2G and 3G. I noticed also that there is an agenda item for 2027, the agenda item 2.12, resolution 812, defined at WRC-19. I don't know if under agenda item with some new proposal that we are going to share with our administration in the framework of the CPT working groups can be find a focus on that. So solutions may be found in the upper part of the UHF band, not at all in the part until 694. I expressed it very clearly in my idea on flexibility use. My experience, flexibility has meant switch off of terrestrial television. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Arturo. So, Ayman, there are a few questions related to agenda items for WRC-27 related to the next generation of mobile, or 6G as they start to be called. I would sum them up in the following question. What are the lessons learned from 5G, and what could be envisioned for the next generation connectivity? And then maybe how WRC-23 can be instrumental for 2030 objectives heading towards WRC-27. So I think this sums up all these questions that I've received regarding the next generation mobile. Ayman?
Thank you, Mario. Let me start about what is lesson being learned from, for example, from 5G. One of the things is that when we have started the 5G and the development of 5G, and we have started to look at like a millimeter wave as the 5G horizons and the primary bands, but let's take the European itself. The primary bands, where is this going to be implemented or deployed or currently deployed, was done in the 3.4 up to 3.8. This is in Europe. So, and this is one of the things which we have to think about it, that these mid-bands are necessary to combine this coverage and capacity which is needed. It's not only the new generation of each of those mobile systems is not only about high capacity, there are also other aspects to be taken into consideration. So when we see this, for example, this is of 5G had happened like this. And we are seeing, for example, there are input coming to the 5D, I2R 5D, and talking about terahertz. Maybe we have to think about it, how to link it with next generation system, which is currently called 6G. And I could think that the mid-bands spectrum, whatever is going to be available, is going to be also one of the fuel and for the engine of those new generation systems. So if I think about the 6 gigahertz band, may offer an opportunity, for example, for the development of further of 5G and as well as the first development of 6G. This is one of the things. So WRC-23 could be an instrumental aspect or an instrumental key to further look at other bands that may be also needed for the evolution of 5G and the next generation system. So to establish those 1.6. So I think a decision coming out from WRC-23 is going to be essential on the work which we are currently looking at it, at the vision of 2030 and how is our life will look like and how those things, beside other spectrum bands. So it's not only just the 23, but maybe we look after the 23, what will come after.
Thank you very much, Ayman. So before we go to the results of the poll that I'm told that they are ready, let me address a question that was addressed to me. So I think it's a very good question that reflects the thinking of many people. It says, do you think the preparation of WRC-23 is being much impacted by the work based on remote meetings rather than in person? And do you perceive the lack of typical corridor meeting breaks, consensus building times as impacting the progress of the preparation? And if so, would you expect some acceleration of meetings or any additional in-person meetings at the last periods of WRC-23 preparation? So I think this question is in the back of the mind of many people. And although I don't know who asked it, I mean, it's a very good one in this environment. So I do agree that let's say the typical discussions in the corridor, in the coffee breaks, and in the social interactions in meetings help a lot to advance difficult discussions. We have been trying to replace them by virtual versions of it, having, let's say, informal discussions arranged through the virtual platforms with some concerned parties and smaller groups. And also the correspondence group mechanism has been enhanced more than usual, so that smaller groups interested in a given topic can discuss, and although it's called correspondence, it's more of a let's say virtual meeting aside of the normal hours of the main meeting. So this has helped. I wouldn't say that it is identical to the physical ones, of course, but it has helped and it has improved advance from 2020, let's say, that it was really the usual type of meetings, but virtual. In 2021, we've been having these enhancements that I mentioned that has helped advance some topics. I fully agree with the last part of the question, which is that as we advance in the cycle, in the 4-year cycle towards the conference, we will be having a more dense and more intense schedule of meetings in order to finalize the studies. And as soon as we can meet in person, we will then have a full agenda of physical meetings in order to make the decisions that are the most important ones for the preparation of the CPM text. As you know, the ITU Council met a couple of weeks ago, and they decided to go with physical conferences next year, and notably the WTSA that is being postponed since 2020, WTDC that is being postponed from this year, 2021, and the Plenipotentiary Conference. 3 of them are going to be held in 2022 physically. So, well, hopefully, because nobody really can ensure that the virus is going away, but we do hope so. So alongside that, we are going to have our ITUR study group meetings physically, hopefully, with a more intense schedule to cater for these needs for the finalization of the studies. But what I wanted to stress is that we will do whatever is necessary with the help of the membership, of course, but we are not envisioning or considering any postponement of the WRC-23. And this has been the case since the beginning, and I hope this is clear to everybody. So there is no such thing as postponing WRC. You know how important this is for the industry, how important this is for the regulators, for the world, and we cannot afford having longer periods than 4 years between WRCs. You will all agree with me on that. So let's now go to the results of the poll. Dan, if you can show them. Okay, thank you. So here are the questions, or the options for you to say which you expect to be the most prominent issues at the conference. And then you have the results of the poll today, and you have the previous results of the same question in last year's conference, 1 year ago. So we can see that in the case of the 6 gigahertz band for IMT, there is a sharp increase in responses saying that this will be a hot issue, while the UHF band remain more or less in the same level, around 40%. And those are the two outstanding issues, obviously, from this result. It was already the case last year, but this year some other topics lost interest or importance to the eyes of the participants with respect to the 6 gigahertz band. So we have discussed a lot about the UHF band, but not a lot about the 6 gigahertz band. So maybe I would give the opportunity to our panelists to say something about this agenda item. Who would like to go? Yes, Glyn, you can take a first shot at it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, before I do that, I just want to make a comment. The previous point that's been made about the amount of spectrum identified for IMT, and I just want to quickly make the point that this can be somewhat misleading for two reasons. One is that spectrum identified for IMT is not necessarily used for IMT in every country, and I think we see a number of examples of that around the world where a band is identified but in practice is not able to be used, for example, because of existing usage. But secondly, that spectrum is not interchangeable, and for 5G you need a number of different types of spectrum in different ranges: low band, mid band, high band. And if you take an example, the 66 to 71 gigahertz band is identified for IMT in the radio regulations as of WRC-19. But I think most people will agree that that is not interchangeable with, for example, low band UHF spectrum. So I just want to make that point first. But that leads me on to the question about the 6 gigahertz band. And, we believe that this is a very important band, as you heard earlier, and has the potential to provide the additional enhancements to 5G, in particular in terms of capacity, citywide basis, which is going to be required into the future for 5G to continue to be a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Glyn. Yes, Adrian, I was going to say that this band is being used by satellite services as well as some fixed services. So what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, again, this is the uplink part of the C-band that I have referred before, that it's very important for the satellite community, the services that we provide in C-band. And I would like to say that the coexistence with IMT in this band is more complicated than, for example, the coexistence with airlines in this band that typically transmit with less power. And in Europe, for example, we have a quite adequate framework for airline. And in this band, the coexistence has demonstrated that is possible. So in that sense, we would have more concerns with an IMT identifications compared to an airline identification of this portion of the uplink band. Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian. Dan, I have a question for you. I have one question that I find interesting to pose to the panelists. Can we have a couple of more minutes, or do you want me to finish?
Yeah, that's fine. We can have another 2 or 3 minutes. So yeah, fine. If you wanted to have one last question, Mario, no problem. Okay, so there is a question that I find interesting and also is coming from Apple. So it's not a usual player in conferences, so I want to give them the opportunity. So he says, would it be an option for 6G or IMT 2030 or whatever it's going to be called to remove the concept of IMT identifications and focus more inclusively in all technologies? So Ayman, yes, I was going to say that this is for you.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, this is a very good and interesting questions. Maybe there are two couple of things to say before I answer that question. First of all, the technology which is being evaluated and being under the IMT family in I2R, and as much as I have already been involved in that process for quite a longer period of time. If I take an IMT Advanced, there was an IEEE technology which is coming up there. They have been evaluated in the hand of also other proponent technology, and they have been also in equal footing with that one. This is one of the things. So it's totally depending on the process, on the objectives and the requirement which is going to be defined. And then you can, and the proponents had the idea, had the freedom or have the opportunities to submit their technology proposals into the process of I2R. So you can have it, but there is also one point which is which is part of the question, is that, for example, IMT is equal licensed. IMT, I'm not quite sure if I understood it correctly, but for example, I don't think that in the specification which we are doing in I2R, which I have already participated to that one, we have such a kind of a concept which is being done. We put kind of a requirement, we put a framework, we put an objective, and it's up to the proponents to submit their technology proposal. So maybe we don't have to mix both of them. This is maybe one part of the question. The other part of the question is that I don't think that ITU is doing something with licensing and things like that. ITU is morely about the technology and how it's going to be assigned and designated to the certain kind of services, application, and things like that. So this is what I can say about it. So it's a process. It's a well-defined process. Have been working well for 20 years or more. There is a technology development. There is a technology proposal coming, and they are going to be evaluated against the requirement and the criteria which is being defined in ITU. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ayman. I would just add 10 seconds that the reason for IMT identification, because IMT is a mobile technology, and you could say why it's not only identified for mobile, is because of the nature of the IMT technology that is let's say, difficult to share with other technologies, because it's really the interference it creates is higher than other mobile technology. So you need to know that here IMT is foreseen in order to be able to arrange the band for other uses as well. So this is why there is IMT identification and not just mobile identification. In other bands, we don't do that. We just identify the general use and then not the specific one. So we've run out of time, and I would like to thank the panelists for a most interesting discussion and session. I think it has been very good, and we've had a lot of questions from the audience, which I would like to thank as well. And thank again the organizers. It's been a pleasure to be here. So I wish you a good continuation of the conference. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Mario, and it's been our pleasure to have you here to moderate that session, and also to have all of the panelists here. So thank you all very much, and of course to Sasha as well for his presentation earlier. So a really interesting session, a chance. I think it was a little bit different to the sessions we normally have on WRC. So it was a chance to look at, obviously, the key issues ahead of WRC-23, but it was nice then to also look a little bit further ahead. So really interesting session, everyone. Thank you all so much. Really do appreciate that. So as Mario says, we now do have to move on. So our next session, we're going to be moving now to our next round of showcase sessions. So we have 4 showcase sessions for you again today. And you can see these on the screen now. So you please make your way to your choice of which session you would like to watch. So on Showcase Stage 1, we have a session hosted by SES entitled SES Ways to Innovation. Showcase Stage 2, a session hosted by Nokia and Plum Consulting, focusing on the future use of UHF spectrum in ITU Region 1, and that's looking at a new report that's been released by Plum on those issues. Showcase Stage 3, enabling private wireless networks through shared spectrum, which is hosted by Federated Wireless. And finally, on Showcase Stage 4, a session entitled Next Generation Spectrum Monitoring, the Role of AI and Big Data, and that one's hosted by LS Telcom. So those are going to be starting in just about 30 seconds or so just time to make your way over there. And then we then are back here on the main stage for our Spectrum Shorts, the last 3 sessions, 3 short discussions that we have, focusing on EMF, on drones, and on fixed wireless access. And that'll be starting at 1:10 Central European time, 1:10 Brussels time. So please do be back here then for that. In the meantime, enjoy the showcase sessions, and thank you again for all of your comments, all of your questions. Thanks to our speakers this morning, and we'll see you back here shortly. Thank you very much.